So today what we're going to be looking at is Suicide in the Trenches by Siegfried Sassoon. So this is the first poem, and I'm going to assume that you have read through it because I'm not going to do that on this. So as you will notice up the top of the page, I have 5 poetic techniques and they are highlighted in different colours, and you can then see how they are highlighted on the poem. So that's something that you should do for each of the poems. You don't have to use highlighters, but indicating which techniques you have in each poem is something that you should make very clear. Okay, so we're going to start off with the title of the poem. So we have Suicide in the Trenches. The first thing I want to talk about here is the term suicide. So what we have there is that it instantly has negative connotations. So we get a sense that it is despair, that the persona in the poem is alone, it's very tragic, but we also know with suicide is that it is avoidable. So we have to contemplate why that is such an emotive and negative term. The other word in the title is trenches, and obviously that clearly refers to the fact of warfare and World War I. It's important to remember that Siegfried Sassoon did actually serve during World War I, and so the fact that this poem is presented in first person, so we have the I here at the beginning, gives us an indication that this is probably based on an experience that he had. Maybe not specific to a particular boy, but it is clear that it's based on his experience. So what we have here is in the first stanza, we have information about this soldier boy. So obviously we have the term simple, and what that is, it implies innocence. So it's not talking about intellect in any way, it's talking about how he is an innocent boy. And we then have that other term there of boy, and what it is that actually criticises the age of some of the soldiers who went and had to fight during the war, and it also links to him being young. And the fact that he is nameless means that it opens it out to being, a common experience. So we also have that he grinned with life and joy, so he was excited, he was happy, and he was obviously enthusiastic to be there. We can see that he slept soundly and whistled early with the lark. So he seemed to be quite comfortable in this first stanza with what was going on. And it is symbolic of coming of age and the fact that the lark is what wakes you up in the morning. So it's all quite positive and happy and symbolises the beginning and excitement. Then we have a transition here. We move from that excitement and the joy to the winter trenches. So the winter trenches is symbolic because it is those bitter and terrible conditions that they had to face. And I'm sure you have looked at that in history. And there is distinct contrast. So you need to talk about the contrast between this cowed and glum. So someone who was excited, who is now cowed. So we think hunched over, and glum, which is very sad. So we have with crumps and lice and lack of rum. So this really emphasises those terrible living conditions that they had to face. And they were unhygienic, there was disease, terrible things happened. And we have that lack of rum, and you might think, well, alcohol, but it was their relief, okay? It was something that they looked forward to because it was, something that they, took them away from what they were experiencing, a way to relax, okay? Then we have that continuation. He put a bullet through his brain and no one spoke of him again. So it's very, very clear, very abrupt. We do have that sibilant, not sibilance, it's alliteration, and I'll go through and fix that up. But anyway, it is alliteration there in that line, and basically with the no one, what that does is there's the interpretation of cowardice, because it was seen to be a cowardly act if you did commit suicide while you're at war. But then it also has to do with just him being another statistic. So the no one here, we have to think in 2 ways. The fact that he did commit suicide and almost just escaped, but then we also have that, you know, the amount of people that actually did die during this war was so large that they merely became a statistic. So that person's family may be thinking of it, but in the general government and way that they were thinking, it was just another number. And that's why a lot of these poets wrote in this way, is because it truly emphasised how horrific the conditions were, but also how the government was pushing and pushing for people to continue fighting, and they weren't necessarily experiencing it firsthand in the trenches. And that's where we go in this third stanza, is this direct political statement. So you smug-faced crowds with kindling eye who cheer when soldier lads march by. And he's really talking about how everyone is meant to be so patriotic. So when the soldiers returned home and they walked down the streets and they had these coming home parades, people were cheering and clapping and, you know, celebrating. But, you know, they didn't have to go and experience that. They were at home and they didn't have to go through what these soldiers did. And so they're smug in that it's quite hypocritical of them. And, you know, their kindling eye, that phrase just means they're easily watching them, they're easily celebrating. And the line here, who cheer when the soldier lads march by, that's quite ironic in that they're cheering and what are they cheering for exactly? And the last statement is quite important. Who sneak home and pray you'll never know the hell where youth and laughter go. So we have that hell and that real statement of that is war. So it's not literal hell, it is, you know, war becoming that hell. And we have those connotations with what, you know, hell means. Again, we have that statement of youth, which links back to the boy. And it again criticises that waste of young life. And so you really need to emphasise that, is that he's trying to talk about how wasted life was in fighting this war. And what he's saying is that this boy who started off really excited, then, you know, where does his youth go? Where does his life go? It disappears. Okay, and so that's really the overview of that poem. You can see how there's different techniques in there. Please keep in mind that that is alliteration. And obviously you have, you know, the A-B rhyming scheme and things like that, but it is important to look at the contrast between the stanzas and then the final statement. That's very political and very much aimed, not necessarily so much at those who were part of war, but those who actually sat at home, were patriotic, and maybe didn't understand those situations as much as someone who had experienced it. So there you go.